Hello again, friends. This is Mike, and welcome back to the Soul Unleashed podcast. Today we're going to continue our series with the apparitions of the Blessed Mother, Mary. Now, this is the fourth in the series, but it's the third apparition that we'll be looking at. I'm looking at 5 apparitions, although there's been about 18 of them. This is the third of 5 today. And just as a quick reminder, I was raised Catholic. I still attend church, although not as regularly probably as most Catholics. But I'm looking at these spiritual apparitions as someone who is undergoing a spiritual awakening, the whole Soul Unleashed process, and particularly someone who is a left brain type. So I have a lot of questions about these. So I'm examining them as a spiritual person, but not necessarily as a Catholic. And I'm sharing them because I find them extremely interesting. The first apparition I covered was on Our Lady of Guadalupe, which took place in 1531. And then that was followed by the appearance of the Blessed Mother to Catherine Labouré in France, Paris, France, in 1830, sometimes called the miraculous medal appearance. And I'm doing these in date order, the 5 that I'm looking at. So 1531, Guadalupe, 1830, Paris, France. And today we're going to look at the appearance of Mary to a young girl named Bernadette Soubirous, which took place in a little French village in the Pyrenees Mountains in 1858. And this is commonly called Our Lady of Lourdes. Hello again, friends and fellow truth seekers. Mike Nicholas here with another episode of the Soul Unleashed podcast, where it's my goal to help you with questions you might have regarding the awakening of your soul, and particularly to help other left brain types, like I think I am, ask the right questions in our search for deeper meaning to life. Ultimately, I want to help you unleash your soul from limiting beliefs and smothering paradigms. So let's talk about today's topic. We're going to be talking about an apparition that occurred in a small village called Lourdes in the Pyrenees Mountains of southwest France. And I'm going to do this like I'm trying to do all these apparitions. I want to cover the basic facts, what happened, talk about the messages, especially in context of the political time, and then discuss the left brain questions that I have about this. That's how I'll wrap it up. So here's the facts. Bernadette Soubirous was born in 1844 to a very poor family. They were millers, and her childhood was marked by poverty and illness. The family's financial situation worsened after her father lost his mill due to financial mismanagement. Despite all the hardships and poverty, Bernadette's family remained devout Catholics, and they instilled in her deep faith at an early age. So our story begins basically on February 11th of 1858, when Bernadette was 14 years old. And it must have been quite cold then in February, but Bernadette and her sister and another friend went to collect firewood for what was called, near what was called the Grotto of Massabila, which is a rocky area by the Gouve de Paul River. I'm probably pronouncing all that wrong. For those of you listening to me in France, I apologize. Anyway, while the other girls crossed the stream, Bernadette hesitated. She was often sick and did not want to go into the cold water. So she stood there by herself, and as she stood there, she heard a rustling sound like a gust of wind, but nothing around her moved. So she turned towards the grotto, and she saw a dazzling light, and within it, a beautiful lady. She described the lady as dressed in white, with a blue sash around her waist, a golden rose on each foot, and the lady held a rosary. Bernadette, although she was frightened, felt an inexplicable peace, and she instinctively knelt and began to pray the rosary. The vision lasted only a few minutes, and Bernadette told the other girls when they returned to her, but they saw nothing. Just as an editorial aside there, I don't know whether Bernadette went looking for wood with a rosary in her pocket, or whether she always carried a rosary with her. I don't know, or whether she was just praying, Hail Marys and Our Fathers, but they don't explain that part. Anyway, in the following days, Bernadette felt a compelling urge to return to the grotto. And the third time she did that, when she saw the vision, the lady asked her, "Would you be so kind as to come here for 15 days? And Bernadette agreed and did so. Bernadette just called her the lady. And at first, Bernadette's family was skeptical and worried about her. They were concerned about her health. Maybe she was hallucinating, had mental issues, and the potential societal repercussions of what she was claiming. Her family was particularly afraid of that. Her mother was worried that Bernadette's claims would bring unwanted attention and ridicule to a family that was already struggling. So anyway, between February 11th, that was the first day she was gathering wood, between February 11th and July 16th of 1858, she experienced a total of 18 apparitions. And during these visits, the lady conveyed various messages to Bernadette, at one point telling her, "I do not promise that you will be happy in this world, only in the next." As word spread and more people heard about the apparitions, the local community's interest grew. Her family began to accompany her, simply to protect her initially, but soon crowds began to gather at the grotto to see what was happening. Some people experienced or claimed to have witnessed unusual occurrences, which only added to the growing belief in Bernadette's visions. So there were three key turning points. I'm just going to discuss three of them, but three key turning points that caused people to believe in what was happening at this grotto. The first is called the uncovering of the spring. So this occurred during the ninth apparition, which happened on February 25th of 1858. Bernadette was praying in front of the vision, and there were many, many people witnessing all this. And she followed the lady's instructions. She was told to drink and bathe in the water, and she could see no water. There was no water there. And the lady instructed her to dig with her hands, and she did so, and she uncovered a spring of water. And the spring had not been there before, but it soon became associated with all the miraculous healings that now take place at Lourdes. But that event greatly increased the credibility of her visions among the local people and beyond. And like I said, by that point, that was the ninth apparition. There were many, many people there, thousands, to witness her do what she did with the spring. So the second key turning point was the announcement of the Immaculate Conception. So this is really key to this whole vision at Lourdes. This is the main thing. The Immaculate Conception was a dogma of the Catholic Church, which believed that the Blessed Mother Mary, the mother of Jesus, was conceived without sin in order to prepare her for her role as the mother of Jesus. The Church, of course, believes that each of us is born with original sin, and that has to be addressed and resolved through baptism. But Mary needed to be so pure to be the mother of Jesus that God permitted her to be born without the stain of original sin. And so she was conceived immaculately, or what's called the Immaculate Conception. So for the second key point of the story, this happened on March 25th of 1858, which was also happened to be the Catholic feast of the Annunciation. The Annunciation is when the angel Gabriel appeared to Mary in Bethlehem and told her that she was going to be the mother of Jesus. And that's the whole basis of the Hail Mary prayer. You know, Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. That's Gabriel addressing her and telling her that she's going to be the mother of Jesus. So anyway, this happened on the feast day of the Annunciation, March 25th, 1858. Bernadette was there, thousands of people witnessing this. And at this point, Bernadette had been asking her every time, "Who are you? Can you tell me who you are?" Because she was being pressured by her family and the local priest and the church and all these thousands of people. They want to know what this vision was saying. They couldn't see it, of course. And so she asked this lady who she was 3 times. And finally, this particular vision, she asked her who she was. And the vision said, "I am the Immaculate Conception." And that was her revealing to Bernadette who she was. Well, the term had been recently defined by the Catholic Church and was not widely known among local peasant population, certainly not known to Bernadette, who was a young, uneducated girl. And she had to keep repeating it to herself, "I am the Immaculate Conception, I am the Immaculate Conception," when she finally told the priest what it was that this lady said. So she used those exact words, which further convinced many people of the authenticity of what she was experiencing. This story, by the way, there's a whole lot that goes on, as far as her being questioned and pressured and all this jazz, which I can't get into on the podcast, but it was pretty interesting reading about it. The third thing, since I'm discussing the 3 key turning points here, the third thing is when the support came from the church. So initially, the local clergy were cautious. However, as the apparitions continued and reports of the miracles spread, the church began to investigate, and eventually the church recognized the validity of the apparitions. It took years. And that significantly bolstered public belief and support in what Bernadette had experienced. Now, from the very beginning, of course, there were believers that were there with her and villagers and everything, but it hadn't gone, worldwide where the church supported it. In fact, there were eventually so many claims of miracle cures from the spring at Lourdes that the church established what is called the Lourdes Medical Bureau. That was established in 1883. And it was established to investigate and validate claims all these people were saying they were cured. And to date, this bureau has investigated over 7,500 claims of miracle cures, and they've officially only recognized 70 as being true miracles. These true miracles have been used by the Catholic Church to cause people to become saints. Saints are canonized based upon miracles that are recognized here on the earth, and some of them came from Lourdes. Anyway, the lady's messages, they focused on prayer and penance, and she requested the construction of a chapel at the site. There were no political messages or dire warnings, as we've seen in the miraculous metal apparitions in 1830, and that we'll see in later apparitions. Her messages were all about prayer and penance. Today, there's a large basilica on the site of the grotto and the apparitions, and it's visited by millions of pilgrims annually. One time, the grotto wall, I don't know if it still is, but at one time the grotto wall was covered with crutches of those who had been miraculously healed. So to wrap up the details of this, Bernadette, after the 18th apparition, and she knew the Blessed Mother wasn't coming anymore, she stopped going to the grotto, although people were now flocking to it, but Bernadette did not. She joined the Sisters of Charity, and she worked and lived with them until her death in 1879. She died at the young age of 35. She continued to have health issues, and she had tuberculosis, actually, and she remained dedicated to her faith and to her duties as a nun. She was canonized as a saint by Pope Pius XI in 1933, and her body remains an incorrupt body enshrined in the convent chapel at a place called Nevers, France. So that whole thing about the incorrupt body is pretty interesting. I mentioned in an earlier podcast about the incorrupt body of Catherine Labouré, the miraculous metal appearance lady, and her body is in France. France, I don't know. France appears to have a lot of incorrupt bodies, but anyway, that's Catherine Labouré. In this case, Bernadette's body was exhumed 3 times as she went through the process of becoming canonized. The first time was like 30 years after she had died, and the whole discussion about how they did that is pretty interesting. There were multiple sworn witness statements, and the people that were witnesses and investigators were doctors, police officials, government officials, church officials, and it appears to have been done in a very deliberate and well-documented way. Anyway, her body is... They call it incorrupt. The pictures I've seen, the stories I've read, it's close to incorrupt, certainly in a condition that no one's body should be after, over 100 years, but you can see it online. Anyway, today, Lourdes is one of the most visited pilgrimage sites in the world. 6 million people, over 200 million total. One of the things I mentioned in my first podcast of the series, and which got me started on this path, was that we have in our family a small music box. My brother actually has it now, but it's a wind-up music box with the Blessed Mother, and it's only about 6 or 7 inches high. Bernadette's kneeling in front of her. That music box probably dates back to the late 1800s. My great aunt and her husband went on a pilgrimage to Lourdes after they were married in 1920, and they brought the music box back as a gift for my grandparents and eventually passed down to us. But that has always been of interest to me, and I've always known about Lourdes since I was a young child. My grandmother would tell me the story, and I also saw the movie Song of Bernadette many, many years ago. The town of Lourdes has become synonymous with miraculous healings and deep spiritual experiences. And the sanctuary of Our Lady of Lourdes includes the grotto, over which is built several basilicas now, and there are also facilities there for pilgrims to stay. Anyway, to sum it up, the story of Lourdes is a testament to the power of faith and the enduring significance of Marian devotion. Now, Marian devotion is often criticized by people who think that Catholics are worshiping somebody other than God, or it equates to idol worship. I've seen all kinds of things about this. But it still underscores the belief in divine intervention in the lives of ordinary people, which to me is a fascinating topic, and which I've talked about on numerous podcasts. How does the spiritual world, the divine world, if you will, get involved in our worldly issues and why? Why would they care about our problems? So, as I mentioned, there are multiple popular movies and books about this. They've been produced over the years. The Song of Bernadette was from 1943. That's the most famous one, probably. It stars Jennifer Jones as Bernadette Soubirous, received numerous Academy Awards. I think it's available certainly today. There's also a 1988 French film called Bernadette and a sequel called The Passion of Bernadette, which follows her life after the apparitions. In terms of books, the most often referenced book, if you want to read about the story, is called Bernadette, The Story of Lourdes. It's by René Laurentin, and he's a renowned French theologian and historian. I've read part of his book. His descriptions are really pretty cool as far as what she went through. So I just want to summarize the messages from Lourdes. There are 5 main messages that were given to Bernadette, and then we'll talk about the left brain questions. The 5 main messages, one was a call to penance. The apparition asked Bernadette to pray for sinners and to do penance. It basically reflects the Catholic emphasis on repentance, conversion, and the importance of intercessory prayers. The second thing is the importance of prayer. The apparition frequently emphasized the need for prayers, and especially the rosary. The third is the message of healing and mercy, and that's signified by the spring water and all the healings that now occur at Lourdes. It symbolizes God's mercy, the healing power of faith. The fourth was the identification of her as the Immaculate Conception. Basically a profound theological statement, and underscores Mary's unique role in salvation history and her purity from the moment of conception. And the fifth was the request for the establishment of a sanctuary. The vision requested a chapel be built at the site and for people to come in procession, which reflects the importance of community worship. So those are the messages. How they relate to France at the time is kind of interesting. And that's tied into my left brain question. So the first question I had was, how does this relate to other pilgrimage sites in the world? And 6 million visitors, 200 million total. It's pretty impressive. Other Christian sites are St. Peter's, the Basilica in Vatican City. Annually, about over 10 million people visit there. They're there to see the Pope and the holy sites in the Vatican. There's another site in Spain called Santiago de Compostela. About 2.5 million people there. Fatima, which is the next apparition we'll talk about, gets about 67 million, somewhat similar to Lourdes. And Jerusalem in Israel gets over 2 million visitors a year. Of course, Jerusalem is a holy site for multiple religions. Those are basically Christian pilgrimage sites. If you look at non-Christian, and this is kind of a shock to me, but non-Christian sites get way more, honestly. First of all, Mecca. Mecca gets over 2 million visitors during the Hajj. It's basically a pilgrimage that Muslims are required to make. It's a mandatory religious duty. And so annually, about 2 million. But in India, there's 3 sites that are really impressive. I'm going to pronounce this wrong for all you folks in India, and I apologize. There's the Kumbh Mela in India. Basically, over 100 million come during the event. The event happens every 12 years, so it's not every year, but 100 million people at one time. There's another place called the Varanasi. Estimated annual visitors around 20 to 30 million. And the Tirupati, estimated annual visitors 30 to 40 million. Those places are about 6-7 times more than Lourdes. So that's where Lourdes kind of fits into the overall scale of pilgrimage sites. The second of my 5 left brain questions is why France? I've already mentioned they seem to have a preponderance of incorruptible bodies, but why France? In 1858, France was under the rule of Emperor Napoleon III, who had established at that time what was called the Second French Empire. And Europe was in the throes of various revolutionary movements, and they were undergoing the rise of nationalism. So the apparitions at Lourdes took place against a backdrop of political upheaval and social change. If you listen to my earlier podcast about the miraculous metal apparition in 1830, the same thing was going on in France. They were going through the July Revolution, and so it was upheaval and political change then also. But you would think, I'm looking at this, trying to look at this objectively, if the spiritual apparition of the Blessed Mother was going to appear someplace where there was a need for prayer and intercessory prayer, and a lot of change was about to happen, you'd think she'd appear in the United States in 1858, because the United States was about to enter the bloodiest war of its history, the Civil War, the American Civil War, which started in 1861, where many thousands, hundreds of thousands of people died, very bloody. It was a battle over some very important topics like slavery. So why France? That ties into the third left brain question, which is the role of the church. So, as with the miraculous metal apparitions in 1830, the church was threatened by all this social change. There was rapid industrialization. The revolutionary period saw a growth of cities, social upheaval, displacement of traditional ways of life, particularly religious life. And the church reacted to these challenges from secular ideologies. The secular ideologies were nationalism, liberalism, socialism. But the church reacted to this with a push for increased devotion to Mary. And so I think the apparitions fed directly into this need to try and bring people back to the church. They deliberately pushed this increased interest in Marian apparitions. So Our Lady of Miraculous Metal and then Lourdes certainly fit into this. And especially since Lourdes was fueled by stories of miraculous cures, it helped to spur basically a religious revival. The fourth left brain question I have is the appearance of the Blessed Mother. So, the physical appearance. So Bernadette later expressed, in some of the writings I've read, she later expressed in her life dismay at the way that the church portrayed the lady that she had seen. Bernadette initially described the lady, the vision, as a very young woman, not much older than the 14-year-old Bernadette, and about the same height. Bernadette was not tall, she was short. And that's how she described the lady. But artists and sculptors and the church, they used artistic license, of course. But the church, I think, had a desire to portray Mary as a mother figure. And so the way that Bernadette saw her did not fit that image of what the church wanted Mary to look like. And so they portrayed her as a much taller and older, motherly-like type figure. And so whenever you see pictures or depictions or statues of Our Lady of Lourdes, she's usually a very tall, beautiful, but very tall, motherly age woman, which is not how Bernadette described her. I found that interesting. And finally, my left brain question is what the heck to believe? As someone who believes in spirituality and the spiritual dimension, I'm ready to believe that a spiritual being could and would present itself as Mary in order to accomplish something or to increase devotion. But there's a lot of things to this story. There's penance, there's intercessory prayer, there's indulgences. I didn't even touch on indulgences, but the church basically offered indulgences if you went to Lourdes, meaning you spent less time in purgatory. That's a whole different podcast topic. But anyway, all those things means that if you're going to accept Lourdes, I can accept it as a spiritual apparition, but I think that there's a lot that went on that was mainly focused for the church and to help the church, and makes me hesitate to accept the whole thing, hook, line, and sinker. So I'm still trying to understand, but I have to tell you that I am fascinated by this, something I've known my whole life, the story of Our Lady of Lourdes, but I never really studied it or paid that much attention to it. And when I look at it in terms of other apparitions, it really makes me, believe that it could be possible that it happened, but still struggling to understand the meaning and the purpose for it. So that is the conclusion of today's podcast. A little bit longer than I intended, but like I said, I find these fascinating. If you'd like to find me, you can find me at mike@mikenicholas.com, or my website is mikenicholas.com. You can leave comments for this podcast or others. If you subscribe, of course, you'll be notified when I release the next one, which will be on Our Lady of Fatima in 1917. Thank you again. Bye-bye.